good afternoon, and welcome to this installment of the 2023 Prince Edward County Authors Festival. Today, I'll be talking with David A. Robertson. I'll give a brief introduction here as a way of introducing you all to David. David A. Robertson is a member of the Norway House Cree Nation, and he's the multi-award-winning author of over 20 books, and they're in a variety of genres, including illustrated storybooks, graphic novels, books for young adults, memoir, journalism, and literary fiction, which The Theory of Crows is, and that's the book we'll be talking about today. So, David, good afternoon, and Tansi, if that's the appropriate greeting for this situation.
Perfect, it is, yeah. Hi in Cree, how you doing? Nice, thanks for having me.
Okay, it's very good to have a chance to talk to you today. I really enjoyed reading The Theory of Crows, and I'm very pleased that we're here together to talk about it. Maybe not everyone who's tuning in has read The Theory of Crows. Do you want to start by giving them a synopsis of the story?
Sure, yeah. So The Theory of Crows is my first adult literary fiction novel. It's a story about a father and a daughter. They both are going through their own personal struggles with mental health. The dad Matthew has withdrawn himself from pretty much a lot of aspects of his life, including his family, and that has caused a division between the relationship that he has with his daughter. So there's an estrangement that happens there, and the first part of the book is really a very close look at that relationship and the breakdown of it and the mechanisms of that breakdown. And then after a pretty substantial loss in the family, they decide that they're going to go on this journey up north to try and find a lost trap line. So they go out into the wilderness together, and going onto the land might be the thing that they needed to heal themselves and heal their relationship. So it becomes more of kind of a little bit of an adventure journey story in a physical sense. But that's kind of briefly what the book is about.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that's a good synopsis, and in some ways it's interesting because the thing you mentioned as the starting point for the book, the father-daughter relationship and the difficulties that the father Matthew and the daughter Holly are having, are one of the first things I wanted to ask you about. It struck me that some of the problems they were having are very similar. They started out being close to each other. One notable thing I remember Holly saying was that she'd never be embarrassed to hold her father's hand, even in front of her friends. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was a beautiful line, and it showed where the father-daughter relationship was at its beginning. But then as it starts to break down, and Holly is a teenager, it seems like some of the things that they're going through are similar, their anxiety and their doubt, and they're both having panic attacks and both dealing with them through meds. So do you think the causes of their anxiety and their troubles are similar?
I think the mechanisms of their anxiety, like the way in which their anxiety plays out in the physicality of it, it's similar. But the catalyst for it is different. For Matthew, it's something that he's been dealing with since he was a kid. Stemming from a complete fear of death, and fear of like the prospect of infinity, and for Holly, I think it's more of an anxiety that's brought on by the need for a figure that isn't there in her life as he should be. So in that way, I think they are similar, but also differ. I think for me, what I wanted to kind of emulate in having their panic, their mental health issues mirror is to discuss the fact that a lot of these things are, passed down, in real life. Something that my mom is someone who deals with anxiety. I deal with anxiety and depression, and it's something that I see in a couple of my kids. So we have to be mindful of that. And sometimes, with mental health, we're so concerned with our own struggles, it's hard for us to see outside of ourselves. And I think that's something that Matthew has to learn how to do, in the novel. But I definitely wanted to talk about, mental health and how it can live intergenerationally within a family, and then the ways in which we heal from it, or the ways in which at least we learn how to live with it in more productive and positive ways.
Right. I take it, and I did find that a really interesting part of the book. And one of the things that struck me about that is that Matthew and Holly are both dealing with it by taking Xanax, but at the same time, when he goes to visit his father has other ways of dealing with that problem. He suggests breathing from his stomach, and he tells him that the land has the answers, and he has a different way of approaching this anxiety. So do you think Matthew has somehow lost sight of those possibilities that his father can offer?
I think so. I think to an extent it has. I took a lot of this story from my own life, in losing my dad just before the pandemic, 2019. He was a big rock in my life and a calming influence that wasn't there anymore. Around that time, I was working on Blackwater, my memoir, that was about my father and I. And in 2020, I had to do so much press about the book, and I had to talk about my dad so often that it kind of led me into a spiral that I found myself at a very low point in my life in terms of my mental health. And having my dad not there was something that, at the same time, as it caused my problems, the answer to it was also missing. So for Matthew, not having his dad there is, I think it had a similar effect on him. And in talking about the different ways in which you deal with anxiety and mental health, I think is not to say that prescriptions aren't helpful. Like me going through depression in 2020, 2021, antidepressants were very helpful for me. And alprazolam is something that is still helpful for me at times. So I think there are ways in which you deal with mental health in a pharmaceutical way, which can be helpful if you do it properly. But there's also, there are ways and strategies that you can incorporate in your life that helps you to live with anxiety, depression, mental health struggles in a different way. So breathing techniques, for example, is something that is very effective. Like breathing in through your stomach, like belly breathing, you call it. Exercise, things like that. So I in writing it in a way, I obviously my main concern was character development in the story, but I've become in my career over the course of the last 13, 14 years, a pretty big advocate for mental health. And in writing about this story, I did want to incorporate real solutions to dealing with depression and anxiety, so that when people read it, not only do they see themselves maybe mirrored in those struggles or come to understand them better, but they also can maybe connect with some of the ways in which Matthew learns to address his own mental health struggles, but also maybe to see the things that he's left behind and how that has affected him. Like, for example, dropping the belly breathing that he has learned from his father. So I think all of it was a way for me to, and weave it into the plot, but also have a conversation I think that a lot of people need to have. And I think it is helpful to have.
Right. I think that I took your point about the sources of the mental health. And one of the things about the structure of the book, you mentioned the two-part structure. The first, they're living in Winnipeg, and the second, they go on a journey back to the land. in part one, I wouldn't say that Matthew and Holly have exactly neglected or forgotten about or their indigenous heritage, but at the same time, they seem to be living a fairly conventional middle-class life. Holly's playing water polo and is concerned about her boyfriend and that relationship. And Matthew's working a straight job. He's talking about playing solitaire in his cubicle. Do you think that sort of separation, the fact that they may have lost touch or connection with the land and their heritage, is part of where the mental health problems came from?
It could be, definitely. I feel like there's two conversations there. One of them is to talk about, what is indigeneity? What constitutes indigenous identity? If you look at me, for example, I'm wearing a collared shirt and I have short hair and I don't speak maybe with the kind of intonation that you might expect someone who's First Nations on reserve to speak with, stereotypically. There's a lot of things about me that don't fit in with the idea of what indigeneity is. And so the conversation there is to say that there's not one type of indigenous person. There's not one way to be indigenous. Like one of the things my dad taught me when he was alive, and he was a big mentor of mine, was, I asked him one time, like, why didn't you teach me how to be Cree, Dad? And he said, well, how am I going to teach you that? You are Cree. So like nothing I say or do can make you more or less Cree. Like the journey for you is to figure out what that means for you, to define that for yourself. And so I feel like that's a big part of it. And so Matthew, going to a desk job, playing solitaire when he should be working, which I think a lot of us have done probably, and like living a life in the city in a middle-class neighborhood, is in some ways like can be like an indigenous lifestyle, but like he also is at the same time missing out on connections to his roots, to his community. And in my own life, I've seen how the connection to land, connection to community and family has really been a help to me, to better understand myself as a Cree person. And so for Matthew, similarly, like going back to the land, reconnecting with the things that maybe he hadn't for a long time, it helps him in turn is the same way it's helped me. So like I think that you can, for example, my dad never went to a sweat. He was a recognized elder, but like he understood the sweat. He understood what it meant and its significance. So I feel like connecting to culture, understanding your roots, understanding like traditions, values, beliefs, even if you practice ceremony, maybe you don't practice ceremony. I think that knowing those things and learning about them is an important part of understanding yourself. And so I do think that one of the things Matthew has to do is find that reconnection, so that he can get a better sense of his own identity, and in turn help him to address some of the things that maybe have led to his mental health struggles. As much as it's a fear of death, it might be also the fact that he's never felt connected to anything, and that disconnect has been something that maybe has almost been a proxy for like his fear of like the unknown. But yeah, I think that conversation is a really important one to have.
Right. And so I think Matthew's father, actually did try to provide Matthew with a context for that when he said he had to learn to walk in two worlds. When he declined to go into politics, he wanted to be able to deal with both worlds. And I guess Matthew is trying to come to terms with that as well.
Yeah, it's balance, and my dad used to talk about that a lot too. It's like finding balance. So, like for me, I live in like a nice neighborhood in Winnipeg. I live in the city. I live in a, urban area. But I also have very strong connection to my community. I identify very strongly with my Cree identity. I have family in Norway House. I go there quite often when, pre-pandemic, a lot more than post-pandemic right now. But like, finding the balance between the two, and then in through that, finding the balance within yourself, I think is the key, and so Matthew, he needs to do that too. Until he does, I think that, he's going to struggle. And as a result, like the relationships around him are gonna suffer as also.
Right.
Like I think that one of the things that I've learned just through my work is that, like, you can't heal a relationship with brokenness. So if you're broken, and the person you're in a relationship with is broken, that relationship can't be healthy.
Right.
You have to heal individually in order to heal, whatever's going on between the two of you. And so I think that's what Holly and Matthew have to do as well.
Right. Right. I think Matthew actually says that to Holly, doesn't he? Something about
Probably. I gotta tell you, like it is very much like very thinly veiled fiction. Like, I'm very open about the fact that in 2020 I was in a very dangerous place, like mentally. I was struggling a lot, and writing this book was actually a way that I often say, like, it helped save my life. Writing this book helped save my life because storytelling is healing. Music helped save my life. All of these things help save my life. And so when I wrote this book, I wanted to find a way to kind of write my way out of what I was going through. And I just made a character that would kind of, walk with me, and so a lot of things that Matthew says and does, it probably it kind of reminds people a lot about me. It's reminiscent of a lot of things I've said, because Matthew in a lot of ways is Dave, and I also, during the pandemic, I had a really tough time with my daughter. We became estranged for several months. And that's on me. I'm the dad. So, I need to be present, and I wasn't. And so I was very concerned about myself, my own struggles, my own depression, and my relationship suffered. And so, but like coming to terms with that, beginning to work on myself, and learning what was important in my life, it brought me to the point where Emily and I, were really able to heal our relationship. And so Holly and Matthew are kind of going through the same thing. So it is like, it's a fiction, but you draw so much truth out of that fiction, from your own life.
Right. No, it makes sense. And reading your biography, I was going to ask you about the connections between the story in the book and the story in your life. They did seem to have similarities. One of the terms you used often in the book was the land. And
Mm-hmm.
In my notes here, my cheat sheet, I even have it in air quotes because it seems to be so central to what you're talking about in the book. And it's used in a really nuanced way. It's both physical and metaphorical and spiritual, and seems to have a lot of layers. And can you talk about that for people who don't really understand the concept of the land with the depth that you naturally would?
Yeah, the land has become such an important character in all my books. I call a lot of my books land-based literature now. And that really came from a trip to the land with my father. We went in 2018 up to a trap line that he grew up on for the first 10 years of his life. And what I noticed when I went there was the first thing I noticed was that my dad at that time, my dad was someone who always looked younger than he was. I don't have that. I think I look 46, and I'm 46. My dad, when he was like 50, he looked 30. When he was 60, he looked 40. He looked young for his age. When he got into his 80s, he looked 80. So his age began to catch up with him, and he began to lose his balance, and he began to feel very weak, and he just looked like, I think we knew that his time was short. And so one day when he asked me to take him up to the trap line, one last time, that was very heavy. And it was also somewhere that I felt was really important for us to go. But when we got onto the water, because we have to get there through waterways, the first thing I noticed was that my dad looked younger instantly. It was like, it was supernatural in a way that, I watched him in the boat, and like almost right before my eyes, he just looked like powerful, and he looked like, I want to use the word stoic, but he looked like he had a strength that he had lost. He got that back. And I feel like even today, that was something that he was drawing from the water and the land, like that it was giving him life. And I really have come to believe that the connections that we can find with the land and the water, whether you're indigenous or not, it gives you strength, it gives you a lot of life. And so that was the first thing that really struck me when I went out to the trap line with my father. The other thing was that, as soon as I stepped onto the land where my dad grew up, where my grandparents grew up, where they spent a lot of their time, I felt like I'd been there too, and I'd never been there before. So that connection, that feeling of home, or that feeling of belonging, was something that I still think about, and I began to help me redefine what home meant. And it's where the term blood memory comes from, that the lives of those people who lived before you flow in your veins. It kind of is woven into the fabric of your DNA. And so the land became, from that moment, something living in my life. And it became something that I wanted to protect and nurture and acknowledge and advocate for. And so it became a big part of all my writing. So if you look at, the Barren Grounds, for example, that's a book that's about environmental protection and land stewardship. That's what that book is really about. On the Trapline is about a grandfather and a grandson going out onto the land together and learning about life, a long time ago, living there. And Theory of Crows is about the healing that you can get from being on the land together, and so, yeah, that connection is so powerful. And I think there are, supernaturally, you think of it like as ghosts and stuff, but I feel like there are things that we just don't understand. And that is also supernatural, the look of my father, that he could look so strong and young so quickly, is supernatural to me, and so I wanted to play with that idea. And yeah, like the land in this book is its own character. The land is as much a character as Holly and Matthew. And it is a metaphor, and it is a location, and it is like a character. It's all of that. And I wanted it to embody so much in the story. And that's why, the return to it is it's a return to self, it's a return to relationship, it's a return to family. It's returned to home, it's a big part. It's a big part of the book. And it was something that, I was, again, like, I wanted to talk about it because it was so important to my own life. I wanted to share that love for it in this story as well.
Yeah, it really came through. It's one of the things I particularly liked about the book. And I liked also the way you made it a character. Other people said it talked. Matthew's father said, "Oh, it remembers and it heals, and it remembers every foot that ever stepped on it." And when Matthew and Holly were lost, they said, "Oh, well, the land will show us the way." And so I think that really was amazing.
There's like the title itself, it actually is really inspired by a song that I've loved for a long time called Theory of the Crows. But I had that song in my heart, and music plays a big part in my life and in my writing. But I was listening to a podcast one day for Somebody Knows Something. A true crime podcast, which, is kind of like, there's nothing true crime about this concept, but they talked about, in one of these episodes, about crows, and about how crows can remember faces for a very long time. They can actually pass down the recognition of faces to future generations. And I just thought, what a beautiful concept that is. Like, and it's kind of like, it reminded me of my connection to the land, how, like, my grandparents could live in a place and I could go there and I could remember it, even though I'd never been there before. That day I didn't need my pills that day. Like I just forgot to take them. I was felt so calm there, and I just felt like, what if you took that concept of like, us remembering the land, crows remembering faces, and you kind of like maybe extrapolated it or expanded it to like this idea of like, what if the land remembered us as much as we remembered the land?
Right.
And I just love that. I love that concept so much, and I think it's probably true, and so that's where the title comes from. Is like, it's kind of like it's using the crows to embody that concept of the land, and it's remembering and welcoming of us to it.
Mm-hmm. So it's something that we have in common as, well, I was going to say humanity, but even that might be too restrictive, of life.
Of life, yeah, absolutely. Like my dad used to talk about like people and like the four-legged and two-legged creatures that
Right.
we share this land with. Yeah,
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah. Now, thinking of, you're talking about crows and the land, it leads to the next thing I have on my little cheat sheet here. One of the great things about the book for me was that you wove things that, I don't want to say they're unreal, but they're real in a different way than physical reality. The dreams, the visions, the memories, the moments of insight were woven into the everyday physical life of Matthew and his family. And I made a little list here thinking of it, and the list just kept growing. I had to stop at 10. But the bear showed up, I think 4 times. Matthew and Holly both had the dream, and then his father said something to the bear. What was it? If you don't mind, would you move? Anyway, there was some really kind line where his father was talking to the bear in a really polite way.
Yeah. So the bear is a relative of my family. Right. So we would look at it as a relative. I think I wrote in that book, a real life. I think it's in the book. It might not be, but the real life story is, I went to Clear Lake, which is a little cottage community in Riding Mountain National Park in Manitoba, and this was years ago. And I stopped by the side of the road with my family because we noticed a family of bears that were, just eating berries out of a bush. I think it was a mother and 2 cubs. And I just felt like, I've seen bears before, but never that close. And I just felt like this, I don't know, this like reverence and like love for these animals. And I just had to watch them. So we watched them for a while, and I got home to the cabin, and my dad was, on the porch working on his crossword puzzle like he always was. And I went up to him, I just very excitedly told him about these bears. I couldn't wait to tell him. I was like, Dad, you wouldn't believe what I saw. And he stopped and he said, did you talk to them? And I said, are you crazy? What are you talking about? Did I talk to them? They're bears, And he goes, no, like if you talk to them, they'll talk to you. If you really listen. Yeah. And he said, the bear is our relative. And so ever since that day, the bear became something more than an animal to me. It became a family member. It became an animal that I had a very real spiritual connection to. And it also became like, that feeling also became like emblematic of, my relationship with my dad, that kind of spiritual connection, that love. And so, when he died, the bear became even more important to me. Like whenever I saw a bear hat, I bought it. Whenever I saw anything with a bear on, I bought it. Right. I got my dad, I got bear tattoos when my dad died, and like, this is actually a map to my dad's trap line in the bear. And so, the bear in this story, is I mean, it doesn't matter really if it's real or not, like if it's really there or not. It's real to Matthew, and it's real to his grandfather, his dad. It's real to Holly, and the guidance that they get from it, and the connection that they feel to it. I think there's a point where it's like, I think Holly goes, or maybe Matthew goes like, Dad, is that you? So like that kind of, and I can't, I probably felt the same way, so it's all so anyway, there's that. And I think that the spiritual or supernatural stuff in this book, there is definitely like a thing with it where you wonder if it's supernatural or not, like if it's really there, or if it's, or if it's like imagined. And the reality is, for me, is that like in a lot of our traditional stories, a lot of the characters in our traditional stories, while they might seem like mythology or folklore, to us they're real. So like if you talk about like the little people, for example, Mimagwijiwak, like or if you talk about like Mistapeo or Bigfoot, like those animals are real to our people, to our culture, to our belief system, to our stories. And I just felt like I wanted to kind of like honor that as well. And for that purpose in this story, that's the bear, and like the role it plays in the story, and its like presence in very important times of the plot.
Right. Well, that's one of the reasons I think made the book work, is that it was much more lively for having those scenes where the bears and the crows and became involved. So when Matthew saw the bear was threatening Holly, I guess she was playing in a sandbox or something, and he rushes her inside and he's closing the door. So you're talking about all these really prosaic things, closing a door to protect her. But at the same time, there's the father is seeing the bear as, oh yeah, I'll go out and have a talk with him. And
yeah,
the scene was so lively, and it wouldn't have worked as well as it did, I think, if you hadn't incorporated those things as if it was perfectly normal to do that.
Well, I think part of that is like this a storytelling technique of, and any new writer, like I talk about this with new writers and emerging writers often, is like the logic that you set for your world is you be consistent with it, but like that becomes the truth of your story, So I think that's the same for this book. I created a world in some sense with this book, and there's a logic to that world. And if you stay consistent and true to that logic, then I think it makes that story work, if I look at the bear as this kind of a character within the logic of my world, and it behaves in a certain way, and it doesn't defy the expectations of that truth, then I feel like it makes it work. It makes it like believable to the story. And so like, yeah, like, and I think there's also something to like the journey of the characters where, you mentioned it, like Matthew runs away and closes the door, and his father walks towards it and opens the door, so there's something definitely metaphorical about that as well.
Right. And then when they're on the land finally, and there's less tension because they've actually, because of the accident, had to live on the land the way their parents did. And when Matthew sees the bear, it just comes and sits by the campfire, I think. And he, in his mind, he's saying, well, it looks just like a human, and it looks like it's thinking about something.
Yeah, I think he just like walks by, and he just like sits by the riverbank, and he just kind of like look. He just watches the river. He's just watching the water. He's just sitting there, and it becomes like a very, like, from threatening to non-threatening very quickly, And I think that's where Matthew goes like, is that my dad? And so I feel like, and I think that presence of like, people who you've lost, how you keep them with you. I think that's very much alive in that scene as well.
Yeah. That scene was terrific because it's where I really felt that Matthew was starting to be healed by his experience on the land. And again, the image of the bear sitting there, just being thoughtful, and Matthew being calm with it, struck me as well. He's actually made some real progress as he took this journey up the river. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's like it coincides with like a physical healing, that emotional, mental, identity, the healing there. I think it coincides with a physical healing, and that is also, and maybe I don't think it's too on the nose, but I think it was definitely deliberate to have that happen.
Right. And then also on my list of here is the way the crows turn up in the dreams, especially in the dream that Holly has while she's sitting in the washroom. I'm trying to remember, they circle lower and lower until they form a black circle around her, and it becomes the entire sky or something.
Well, I think actually, if I remember it correctly, like she's dreaming about driving down a certain street in Winnipeg,
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
then I think the crows kind of announce themselves, and then everything becomes the crows. So like I think the car kind of like
It breaks
evaporates
apart.
into
Yeah,
birds,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know, and then they kind of lift her up, you know. So I love that visual. Like I had this kind of yeah, I kind of had this like that picture of it in my mind, almost like a music video, you know. And I just thought that's just such a beautiful image, and I wanted to incorporate that into the story. And just like, you know, just not to give any spoilers, but just like, you know, the end of the book, you know, and how that's a bit of foreshadowing, but like that kind of, it's the same kind of presence and feel, that kind of like the lyrical, the beauty, the poetic nature of that scene, I think is, you know, I think it's really quite beautiful, but it's also, I think it's also really quite poignant as well.
Yeah, the beauty of that scene in the final scene where the crows come back seemed to reflect the real reconciliation of the healing of Matthew and Holly. The,
Hmm. Yeah, not to give anything away, but yeah, definitely. I think that's you know, and it leaves it, you know, the story I think leaves it very open-ended, which is, I think I love that too, because, you know, characters, a really good character, I think should like it's something that the reader should take with them, and they can live with the reader, and the reader can decide, like, you know, what their life looks like after that, you know, what that moment means.
right.
And I like that open-endedness, but yeah, I think that the setup for it is, you know, it's something I knew from the beginning where I wanted to end. And everything in a way was like the momentum of the story led to that one moment. And it gave me a, you know, when you know where you're going, no matter where you go in the journey, um, I think like you never lose sight of like how you're going to get to where you need to go, you know, and I think it helps like with the story as well. You know, you know you need to get there, you know. And that's, I love the exploration, the creation, the creativity and exploration of like art in that way.
Right. I've got a couple questions coming in here, but I'm going to preempt them because there's one I particularly wanted to ask you, or something I wanted to talk to you about, and I don't want it to get lost because I'm curious. And it's the character of Matthew's father. You know, it's mainly the two-character story, the journey story of Matthew and Holly, but the father is obviously a hugely important character. And as I thought about him, one of the things that came to mind that I wasn't quite able to figure out, although I'm developing a theory, is that this is someone who's been to a residential school and whose parents have been to residential schools. And so he's been through, you called it a hell, I think, and he's been through all these horrors. The worst horrors that can happen have been inflicted on him in the name of religion. And yet somehow he's become a Christian minister, someone who's been able to help people through that ministry. So the contradiction seems there. What happened to him that he was able to overcome those horrors and that hell to be able to embrace the religion that they were done in the name of?
It's a really tough subject. You know, and I, you know, there's a lot of people in community, a lot of people who've been through that history, that rightfully have a lot of anger, resentment, and hurt towards that, you know, religion, Catholicism, Christianity. My dad was a minister too, and he was someone whose mother went to residential school. My grandmother was a survivor. My dad went to day school, which was, you know, very similar to residential schools. He got to go home at night, but still that school was operated very similarly as residential schools were operated. What I wanted to get at, and what I really believe, is whether or not you believe in the existence of God. That doesn't, you know, that's not the point for me. But the point is, the school system, that's the evils of man. that's the evils of man, inflicting that evil in the name of a God, in the name of a religion, right? It's not God that did it, it's some really shitty people, really shitty human beings who hurt children, and my dad did a lot of good as a minister. He worked at a residential school for a couple of years when he was younger, and like he was there in the name of a God that was, I think he interpreted differently, and he treated people with respect and love. That's the kind of God that I want, whether you believe in God or not.
Right.
I think that's the kind of way we should treat each other,
Right.
with respect and love.
Right.
And I don't know any God or any figure like Jesus, if that he would have, if he was really who he says he was. And that's not what this conversation is about. And it doesn't matter. But like the Jesus that this Bible talks about, the people who ran that school, who ran the school system, it would have made him sick to his stomach, what they did to those kids, and what they did to my grandma, what they did to, So I just think it was important for me to talk about the work my dad did he was more known as an educator, but he was a minister. And then I think that having a conversation like this, I think is really important, that, that history is, that's why in the Barren Grounds, I made the bad guy in that book a middle-aged white guy, frankly, because like the evils, most of the evils that were done, and there's a lot of great middle-aged white guys in the world, really nice people, but the colonialism, like colonial systems, like systemic racism, like the residential school system, those were brainchilds of middle-aged or older white men, and it wasn't the brainchild of a God any God that I know, and that was the point of it to me.
Right. Well, that in some ways tallies with what I was thinking and speculating when I did try to think about this character. And I'll even talk about the character and your father interchangeably, if that's okay.
Yeah.
They must have been an extraordinary person to be able to have the insight and strength to push aside all of the evil of Christianity and with it out of the way to see the core of what was really at the religion, but apart from the evil that those people did with that core. So it must have been really the character, and your father must have been an extraordinary person.
My dad was the best. He was a pretty amazing human being. Yeah. He was somebody I carry with him in a lot of good ways. He was someone I wish he was still here, but he was the best. And I think, like, probably more than anybody, Matthew's dad is my dad, and he was, I don't know, he was just the best person I know.
Well, it was a pleasure to have met him indirectly through Matthew's father. And one of the things about the book that I also wanted to ask you was that you've, I think maybe most of the people who are listening know, but I'll repeat it. You've produced a lot of literature for young adults and for children, but this is the first bit of literary fiction. But it struck me that you've integrated elements from both YA and literary fiction to create something that's not sort of confined by either form. And in fact, I think people of many different ages could enjoy reading this book. So that's something you were working on, presumably.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think one of the things that I'm not someone who ever rests on my laurels or thinks I'm any good at something. I don't. But I am proud of how I've been able to find success in different forms of literature. It's something I just work really hard at it. And writing children's lit, and the sensibilities that I brought to writing children's lit, for example, never writing down to a child, because children are so smart, and I the Barren Grounds, for example, it's a really complex book, but I didn't worry about that writing it for like a middle grade audience, because kids are smarter than I am. So, I think about, really more than anything, content and age appropriateness. But yeah, so for the Theory of Crows, I do think it does straddle a line. I very deliberately wrote the chapters that Holly's the center of, and you see the story through her eyes. I wrote that in a YA style, and very deliberately. And then with Matthew's chapters, I wrote it very much in a style of literary fiction. Yeah. And then what the challenge for me was, weaving those two styles together in a way that was not seamless, but that worked for the story. So I wanted you to, when you read about Hallelujah or Holly, I wanted you to feel like you were really reading it through the eyes of a 16-year-old girl. And then with Matthew, I wanted you to read it through the eyes of a 40-year-old man. So in doing that, you need to write in different styles. And like the letters, you have to write in a third style. You have to write from Matthew's, from Matthew's first person, like his voice, like his words that he would use. So it took I think it took the integration of 3 different styles of writing to make this book happen and to make it work. But I think for the most part, I think it works. And I love that more than anything. The connections that I've made from readers with this book are connections that are brought about by the storytelling and the themes of like loss and grief and relationship, and so yeah, I think that was all I think the biggest challenge, but also the biggest success from a storytelling perspective of the Theory of Crows.
Right. Yeah. No, I was very impressed by that mixture of 3 styles. And for people who haven't read the book, the chapters that break the YA style of Holly's point of view and the fully adult style of Matthew's are letters that Matthew has written, presumably to Holly, although I didn't know they were real physical letters until almost the final scene of the book, where she saw them poking out of his pocket or something. But then Holly was a really believable adolescent, but her character wasn't limited to that, because when they were on the land and Matthew had been badly hurt in the accident, she begins to take care of him. And so her voice and I think her psychology began to mature. So you see a full development of her character. So it's not limited to the angst of adolescence in the YA style. She's really fully developed.
Yeah, I'm really proud of, like, when people often ask me who my favorite characters are that I've ever written. And I think it's like Morgan from the Barren Grounds and Holly from this book. I'm really proud of of their journeys, and their development as characters. So that was all like really deliberate. But I'm glad that you noticed it. But I think that it took a lot of care, and I think Holly's actually probably like the unsung real hero of this book. She's someone who I think in a lot of ways is the heart of this story, as much as maybe the father is too, like the grandfather. But a lot of people love Holly who read this book.
Right. Well, I'm one of them. And anyway, I'm going to go to a couple of questions that have come in. Lost them. I got to bring this one back up here. Adam has said, traditional folk beliefs are fascinating. Are you influenced by any other folk beliefs from around the world? And the examples he gives are African, Greek, Scandinavian, etc.
I appreciate what I've learned from different cultures, different religions, different beliefs and systems or values. I think there's things that I think we would be very ignorant if we didn't, look at something like that and feel influenced by it. If it gives you something of value that you can like incorporate into your own daily life, like if you look at Buddhism, for example, like there's a lot of like sensibilities or in Buddhism, like there's a lot of like things within that belief system. I think that would do a lot of people good, and just like with the, for example, like the Anishinaabe culture with the seven teachings, that's not a Cree construct, that's an Anishinaabe construct. But like, courage, truth, love, wisdom,
Right.
honesty. I think we could all do well with incorporate that into our lives, right? So, yeah, I feel like that those are. So, and as a writer, I at least for me, like you often hear, write what you know. I actually don't believe that. I feel like it's like right to learn, right to explore, right to like understand the world better, And so as a storyteller, as a writer, I've been able to, I think, like learn a lot of things, and that's been of great benefit to me. But yeah, I think there's like I think there's things that you learn that maybe aren't from like your own cultural belief structure or whatever, that I don't know, that I think is of great value probably. I don't think we should be bound to live in one way, yeah. So I think that I would say yes to that answer.
Okay, that answers that question. Another question that's come in is one that I would have asked anyway. Have you got new work on the go?
Yeah. I have, well, I probably have too much on the go, but I have, I actually am working on right now, like I probably shouldn't say much about it because I haven't announced it yet, but I'm working on another, nonfiction novel I'm starting to work on. And then I have a couple of adult novels I'm working on for HarperCollins that will come out in the next probably 5-6 years. And then I do have, a lot of children's literature work. I always will. So I have like the last couple books in the Misawa Saga series. I have like a couple of picture books coming out. I just had one come out a couple weeks ago called A Song That Called Them Home. And I have, a hockey book that I've been working on, like for a middle grade hockey book. Yeah, so I have a few graphic novels. So yeah, I have a lot of books on the go that I have like, deadlines for. But yeah, it's, I'm pretty much like booked up in terms of projects, probably for the next, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. And then maybe I'll take a year off or two after that, just to give myself a bit of a breather. But
Yeah, judging by the list of books that you've got on the go, it sounds to me more like 10 or 15 years, and you'll be lucky to get a week off.
It could be.
That's a huge schedule. Do you juggle the different forms at once, or do you try to focus on one and wrap it up? And
Yeah, I have to give myself space between the two. So I'll work on, the adult book in the morning, and then I'll maybe work on, like book 5 of the Misawa Saga in the evening. I need a bit of space between the two to get myself in the right headspace to write the stories from the right perspective with the right voice. So I need to give myself some prep time, some time to get in the right mood to write the kind of book I'm working on. So I do give myself some time between projects. But I usually can work on like, maybe a book or two in a day. I just space it out. Yeah, but other than that, I just, my time, like I'm in Texas right now for a conference out here in Austin. And so I do a lot of traveling for my job as well. A lot of school visits, a lot of, festivals and conferences. And so I juggle that. And then just being a dad, and being present for my kids and driving them around and stuff like that. So it's all, but I I have a great wife who is amazing. She does a lot of work and schedules my time pretty well for me. and yeah, so we work in it as a really good unit, my wife and I. So we're able to get a lot of things done.
yeah. Well, based on the schedule and the number of projects you've got on the go, I can see how you definitely need a colleague manage it and make it all work out as well as it has.
Yeah, I've got a good one. Yeah, she's great.
Yeah. Anyway, we're almost at the end of our time here. Would you like to read a passage from the Theory of Crows so that the people who
Yeah,
get a sense of it?
yeah. Maybe what I'll do is I'll just read a letter from Matthew.
Okay.
It's one actually that talks directly about the title. So I'll read that one. It's just like I think it's 2 pages long. So
Good choice.
yeah, here we go. This is a letter that Matthew ostensibly writes for Holly. So this is it right here. Your Musham used to talk about the trap line like an old friend he hadn't seen for years. He'd made plans to visit. He'd intended to visit, as people make plans to see one another, but never did. They weren't empty promises. He just ran out of time. When we got deep in a conversation, our words always led back to the land. For Yamusham, the land was the answer to everything. The trees whisper answers to any question you could think to ask by the rustling of their leaves. Yamusham said the land remembered every foot that pressed down on its surface, every set of eyes that gazed upon its ancient beauty, every fingertip that touched its skin, every face the sun warmed. Every living thing, the fish, the four-legged creatures, the birds, was an extension of the land. And when you walked onto it, you became an extension of it too. You became the land. He said you could remember the land even if you had never been there before, if your ancestors lived on it. And in turn, the land remembered you. Your Musham used to talk about the crows. They would erupt from the trees like shards of night and circle above in a dance, these swirling lines of black. When they cawed, it would be a song. They would dance to that welcoming song. As you walked deeper and deeper into the trap line, the crows would lower, their music would grow louder, and soon you'd be engulfed by them. It would feel like night, no matter what time of day it was, but you wouldn't be afraid. I used to try and picture crows bursting from trees, flying in circles, singing a welcoming song, and dancing lower and lower until they held me in their dark embrace. It was hard to believe. Would crows do that? Would they dance in the air? Would they sing? What was the trap line? Some kind of messed up Disney movie? Could a bird remember somebody even after years of absence? And how long did a crow live? 10 years, 20? If somebody could remember the land, even if they'd never been there before, could it work the same with crows? Could the crows remember them and their children and their children's children? Could crows pass down that recognition? Your Muslim never lied to me, but there were Cree legends he told me that I knew weren't true, that represented something else. Like, I know that Canada isn't actually on the back of a turtle. I know that Wesakajak didn't create humans. He didn't make mud out of dirt and water, mold that mud into a humanoid figure, dry it over fire, and breathe life into it. The theory of crows seemed equally tenuous, but provable if you were to go to the place where you would be remembered. The irony of all this was that your Musham couldn't remember where his trapline was. For all his talk of how the land and the swift water, the birds and the four-legged creatures could answer any question, remember any person, accept you as a part of it, it was lost to him. Water levels rose and changed once familiar shorelines. Landmarks fell away like broken street signs. Cabins were destroyed, cabins were constructed. Maybe if he could have gone himself, maybe if he could have traversed the same waterways that he did as a child, maybe he could have found his way there one last time. Maybe he could have seen enough of the path to rediscover the place that he remembered, and it would have remembered him, a waterfall, a bend in the river, an eagle's nest bulging at the top of a thin tree, like a bursting water pipe, a lake with so many reeds protruding through the surface that it looked like hair, a narrow stream no wider than a sidewalk. Your Musham used to talk about the importance of time. The animals had patterns that you needed to follow, and if you missed those patterns, you ate less, and you were able to trade less. You would be left behind as though swallowed by the darkness and lost within it. I've never been to the land. He ran out of time, and because of that, so did I. But I know what that's like. I know what it feels like to know what home is and not be able to find your way there.
Nope. There you go. That's lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Okay. And I'm going to close out by saying that I thought The Theory of Crows was a wonderful book. I recommend it to everybody. You can get it at your local bookstore. That's what the cover looks like. And you can get it at the library too. I think they have a copy, but if they don't, I'm going to donate the copy that your publisher gave me to the library system. So I can promise you that it will soon be there. Thank you, David, very much.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, been a pleasure. Take care.
All right, take care. Thank you.
So long.